Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. This is a bonus episode. And as usual, I'm Scott, and usually I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm keeping it real, Cowboy. How about you?
I'm not too bad, that's right. We are jumping aboard the Bebop. And we are going to be talking about the Netflix series Cowboy Bebop. And this is going to be an interesting one. But yeah, Cowboy Bebop came out recently, sort of November, I think, 10 episodes, an adaptation of the original anime that came out in the late 90s, I think 98, starring John Cho, Mustafa Shakir, Daniela Pineda, Elena Sante, Alex Hassel. That's about it, really, for the main cast, I suppose. And yeah. Let's start with a simple one, as we usually do. I'm not going to do a plot because it's 10 episodes, and if you know the anime, you know the story. But let's do a basic concept. So I think the basic concept is set in the future. Cowboys are bounty hunters, and they go on obviously different missions. And the main cast are made up of 3 individuals that live aboard the Bebop, which is Jet Black's ship. He's a former cop. Spike Spiegel, formerly known as Fearless, who was a member of the Syndicate, and Faye Valentine, who is unknown who she was before this, was resuscitated from cryo sleep, and all have become bounty hunters. And the story takes them against all kinds of lunatics across the galaxy, but also ends up taking them against Vicious, who was Spike Spiegel's partner when he was part of the Syndicate, and their love, or the sort of the love triangle between them two and Julia, which ends in.
Well done.
I think that's a sort of, in a nutshell.
Yeah, and in the anime, they also have Radical Ed, who's this sort of young girl who's a hacker. And in both they have, Ayn the dog. So there's a little more of an ensemble in the anime. But yeah, I mean, for me, this has really polarized critics, this live action one. And it's funny, it's already been canceled by Netflix. But there's a petition to give it a season 2 that has like over 50,000 signatures, and then there's a separate petition to make sure that it doesn't get a season 2 that has tens of thousands of people too. So this has really polarized people, and I think I'm on the positive side and you're on the negative side, if I'm right.
Yeah. Now we've both watched all episodes, and I'm not going to say it's all bad. Like, it's not all terrible. However, I do think one of the things that you and I sort of discussed this a little bit off air and stuff is this highlights interesting ideals about adapting one thing to another medium. So this obviously goes from anime to live action, and the same goes for adapting comics or books and stuff. It's this thing of, if you do a faithful adaptation, is that the best thing, or do you have to change it up for the medium that you're approaching? And to me, that's where this sort of fails in that respect. But let's start with the positives before I start sort of like pooping all over it. So, what you've got some general? Well, you've got positive. You are coming out. You enjoyed this. So, what is it you enjoyed about this?
I think it's a lot of fun, and I think that, I mean, this inevitably gets into an idea of adaptation. I mean, I think on its own, if this did not have the comparison to the anime, people would say this is a lot of fun. The acting performances are great. I don't know what the hell people are talking about when they say it looks cheap. I watched the whole of that Mark Miller superhero show on Netflix. I thought that looked cheap, especially in comparison to like The Boys on Amazon Prime. This looks Cowboy Bebop on Netflix looks expensive to me. The ships look great. Yes, there's not the interiors look great. It looks designed really well. Yes, there's not enough exterior shots of like, the colony is seen from space. They don't go to Earth, unlike in the anime. I do think that would give it more of a sense of the universe and how this whole thing works. But I think it looks good. I think it's fun. And I compared it to sort of like was it Hong Kong Hustle?
Kung Fu Hustle.
Kung Fu Hustle. Thank you. In that sense of just like, it's wacky, it's over the top, and I think that it fixes some of the problems of the anime while not carrying over some stuff that is good and that people want. But I think if it weren't attached to the anime, it would be reviewed a lot better.
I definitely agree with that. I do definitely agree. No, I'm not one of those that's beholden to the anime. Like I've watched the anime and I enjoy it. Like I thoroughly enjoy the anime. But if they make a good adaptation, I was actually really excited for this. Like watching the trailers, there was a trailer for this that they utilized the screen divide, so that they were pushing the screen divide like back and forth, and they were going from scene to scene, and then eventually sort of Spike grabs the scene divide and it uses it as a sort of a bow staff. And like I was like, this looks cool. Like that's a great trailer. Like I was really hyped for this. And then I started to watch it, and it felt like that thing about it looking cheap. I don't think it looks cheap. But it looks very sort of, everything looks like a set. That was the problem I had. It's like, oh, they've gone from this room to this room. Like everything felt closed in. That was the one thing I'd say about this show. It felt very closed in. Like, there was no, nothing felt, and whenever they were outside, for the most part, it was dark.
Or it's streets, and so it's blocked by other buildings.
Exactly.
And that's the like exterior shot thing, right? Like you don't have as much of a sense of place.
No, it always felt like it was on a set. And that's not always a bad thing. That's not always, that's not always a terrible, because you say like the interior of the ships and stuff, and the club, like the clubs they go to in some other places look great. Like, we've talked recently about sort of like set designers and set construction. It all looks good, but it needs to be that needs to be one element, and then I want to see them sort of like in a wide open space. Like I want to see that sense of scope or that sense of scale, like and I think you obviously get that. Weirdly, you get that better from the anime, because you can do that in animated shows. You can show those things. It's easier to do. But yeah, that was one. It felt a little claustrophobic in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism. And like I said, I mean, it's a weird world anyway. I mean,
yeah.
The thing is, like, it's set in a world that's not in the too distant future, where humanity has colonized basically, most of the planets of the solar system and, moons, but it has these little colonies with very little central government oversight. Mm-hmm. And there is a central government, but there's also tons of crime. And one of the ways they accommodate this is with this system of bounty hunters, of cowboys, who are sort of necessary but reviled.
Yeah.
All of this, I have given like more of a complete description than either the anime or the live action show does. So, I mean, I think ultimately a lot of it comes down to whether it just works for you, whether the timing works, whether the acting performances work, whether the banter works. And I think way more often than not, it works on the show for me, the live action.
Yeah, for you. I mean, there's things in this, and I'm going to think of examples. We talk about the thing that you carry over. What do you carry over from the anime? And again, we'll talk about the main cast in a minute, but I've got very little bad to say about them in all honesty. But there's things like, so in the in the anime, there's this sort of reoccurring gag of, there's like a TV show where there's sort of like these there's a, you know, this blonde curvy sort of, you know, character with big boobs, and then this sort of like this black guy are sort of like pronouncing and declaring who the bounty are for today, and sort of like, you know, that will sort of set them off usually sometimes on their mission, and they try and translate that to so the thing is, when you watch it on the anime, you can get away with this weirdness. You know, with animated shows in general, like, you can get away with a level of weirdness that, like, you don't have to go, someone's producing that TV show, like someone's casting that, someone's working on that. Like, you don't care, you don't think about that. But I mean, the show inside the show. When you watch it live action and you see that they are watching this program where they're announcing the bounties and stuff, like, and again, they have her sort of like, you know, not as scantily clad as she is in the anime, but like this character and stuff, and you're like, yeah, none of this is, that whole thing like just doesn't work. And this show seems peppered with those moments where I'm like, I think I'm about to get into it, I think I'm about to settle into it, and then there's something like that where I'm like, yeah, no, that just doesn't work for me. Like, this is one of those things where they should have just gone, cut that. Like, that doesn't look good in live action. Like, cut that or translate it into something else.
I think there are ways of doing it and making it work a little better. I don't think that it doesn't work. I don't think that it works, but I don't think that it, you know, pulls me out of it in the way that it does you. You know, I know what you're saying. I mean, obviously, but I think there's a double standard here. And the double standard is, like, in animation, you don't ask these questions.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I don't. I'm not going to lie. I probably am less inclined to ask those questions in anime, but I ask those questions. And that's one reason why I always have fights with my buddies who, you know, are more forgiving of anime. And I'll watch this stuff and I'll be like, yeah, but this, you know, like, who's making that broadcast? You know, like, who is this? How does this run? Well, it doesn't matter. It's fun. Yeah, well, you know, you don't get to not ask those questions because it's anime. And I get it. Some worlds aren't fleshed out. Some worlds, you know, that's fine in any medium. I'm not saying every world has to have a you know, a secret origins special explaining everything behind it.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's fair to ask that question of live action if you have not also asked it in anime, except to say that the anime, I mean, anime tends to be more exaggerated, and you can get away with that in cartoons. It's harder if everybody acted that way in live action. It'd be like, oh my god, what's going on? You know,
yeah, but
so
but that's the sense of the medium, isn't it? And this is what I mean by adaptation. It's like you get sort of like gimmies for every medium. Because, you know, let's take comics, like superhero comics, like the way that they do, and this is an odd one to me, and I'm going to throw a weird one in because I've been thinking about this recently. When you draw a superhero, right, we have now had it sort of stopped pretty much that you don't give melon-sized breasts to sort of every female superhero, which is great because it's ridiculous, and then there's sort of like the figure form of thing. However, we still do get, like, you know, pretty much every male character still got, like, you know, chest popping pecs and sort of like six packs and all well defined and stuff. And you go, right, well, it's a bit of a, you know, firstly, that's a bit of a contradiction, but, you know, you look at that and you go, wow, look, you know, they go, oh, look at like Jim Lee drawing Batman and all the muscle definition. You go, right, yeah, that does not, you couldn't do that in live action. Like, it looks ridiculous. You'd look like Adam West if it was just that you need, like, the Batman suit from, what's it? Batman
and Robin.
Which is or the sort of the type of one that they had for Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman, like the sculpted one. It has to be this sculpted suit, and you go, right, fine, okay, that's what it is, because because when you do translate it directly, you accept it in comics. So you completely accept that this grey shirt with the bat symbol on it clings to Bruce Wayne in such a way that it defies his entire sort of physique. in this way, and you accept it and you move on.
I don't accept it. I don't accept that in comics. I mean, I am constantly bothered by that. I am constantly bothered by, Nightwing jumping off buildings and or Batman, like grabbing a flagpole. Yeah, you just fell 60 feet and your arm just got ripped off. And the women might be less well endowed than they used to be, but they still look like they weigh 100 pounds, and you're probably not going to flip, 10 guys in combat, armor. If you weigh 100 pounds, judo can only take you so far. I mean, all of these tropes of the medium, these are just tropes of genre and tropes of stylized depiction. There's plenty of superhero comics that don't do that stuff.
No, but let's say the majority do. They're and you say they're the tropes. They are the stylistic tropes of the genre, of the medium, because then you translate those to animation, and you lose some of that. Like they go, okay, well, in animation, we're going to draw them in a different way. Like you get, Tim, Tim's, the Batman animated series, or of the 90s, or Bruce Timm, sorry, and then or you get some of these other series where they go, okay, they're going to do them stylistically, but in a completely different way, and you don't get that. And again, like, you then accept other tropes because it's in animation, and the same with, I'd say, with anime. Like, anime, like you say, it's a cultural thing that the sort of the animation and the sort of stories of anime are exaggerated, and they have this there are certain tropes that come out of those and stylistic things, and you accept them because it's part of the culture. It's part of that sort of anime culture, whether it be in the manga or then in the animated sort of anime. So fine, but if you're then going to adapt that to live action, then. And I have to admit, I've watched a couple of anime live action adaptations. I watched the Death Note one, and there was Full Metal Alchemist, and a couple of others. And I was like, right, none of them really work for me for the same reason, because they sort of go, we've got to now introduce these grounded elements, but we want to keep this from the anime. And the things they want to keep are always these slightly exaggerated elements. When you go, it comes out of nowhere, and you go, you can do that in the animation because that's the culture, that's the expectation, that's the trope. You can't then apply it to and I think that Bebop does it less than some of the others, but still has it where they want to go a certain route, and every now and then it's like it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think. You have to make these choices. I think that, there are ways like with the TV broadcast where, I mean, one of the things that's really apparent is, Faye Valentine in the anime looks like a manga character. Yeah. Super, super skimpy, unbelievably long legs, literally, she's in the same scene with Jet Black, who's got like full body armor, and you're like, aren't you cold? And she's presented as a competent person who's flying around, but yet is wearing this, and that's a sort of trope of a lot of anime and manga, not all of it, but they have to tone that down for live action, especially today. The same thing's true on that TV broadcast, where part of the charm, if you find it charming, of that TV broadcast is, this sort of like ditzy blonde girl with, she's wearing a jacket that sort of is form-fitting along her breasts, leaving them exposed in the middle. And, that works aesthetically in the anime, but you can't do that in live action. And so you have to make these kinds of decisions. I think they could speed it up, kind of, like Baz Luhrmann, Romeo and Juliet, and do sort of like, where you're sort of sped up and slow down and sort of like distorting what you're seeing enough to make it seem wacky and work a little better than it does. But I mean, these are decisions that you have to make as you're adapting. But I don't think that, I guess what I'm rebelling against is the idea that, like we accept these tropes and that you then can't adapt those tropes to another medium. Because, like when I watch an anime and I see two characters standing 6 feet apart, and one jumps at the other one with a weapon. And all of a sudden, that person is in a tunnel of motion effects. And that shot of them in that, motion effect tunnel goes on for 30 seconds as they clear 6 feet. I think, what the hell are you doing? This is a piece of crap. I refuse to watch this.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So, I mean, I reject those, not completely. I mean, I get it, but you know what I'm saying? I don't know that the original can get pardoned for stuff.
You're right. There's still stuff, like you said, there are still stuff that is daft. Like you say, those sorts of things. Certain times in anime, the exaggerations go too far. Like I've not done deep dives into anime, so I couldn't speak to everything. But there are ones, and like you say, that thing of sort of like usually like massively exaggerated weapon, and then like you say, they start sprinting towards someone, so you get that motion effect, and you sat there going, I could have stepped out the way of this, like this is ridiculous. And then the other one that does bother me is they'll do an action like a punch or a shot or a sword swipe or whatever, and it cuts to slow mo of them sort of having committed the action, and then the event is like the head popping off in slow mo. That gets overused quite a lot as well. So I agree, there are ones that sort of are either overused or don't really are a bit daft even in their original medium. But that tells you that you look at it and go, right, well, we shouldn't be doing that in the live action, and they don't. And so just the point is, I think, and I think I'm trying to think. The show is one example. I'm trying to think of some of if there were others. Radical Ed in the last couple of seconds of the show was the one where I was like, I'm so glad they didn't introduce this at any point earlier in the show, because it looks like a Nickelodeon show has sort of like puked up into the sort of Cowboy Bebop, and I'm like, why is this happening now? Like, it looks awful.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, you can't do Radical Ed without being exaggerated like that. That's intrinsic to the character, and yet it does not work in live action. I mean, maybe there's a way of doing it, but it doesn't work. Those that last minute or so, and I think they made a good decision not to include Radical Ed earlier. I mean, this is a streamlined plot. I mean, the other thing that they do that's smart, even though, you and I don't think the actor who plays Vicious, he's in a different movie. He's in a different show than the other characters. He is over the top, and, he's just not in the same universe. I quite like, I think Jet Black steals the show. Spike is very good. I think he is very cool in this. He's about as cool as you could expect. A live action version to be, and I think people who think every shot in the original is cool and defining of cool are full of shit. But they make decisions that I think improve the narrative structure of the show, of the series as a whole, but also of some of those episodes. Having Vicious there in the present, having it centered around that sort of love triangle with Julia. Not all of it works because, again, we're not in love with Vicious. But, they get rid of Vicious's ridiculous bird, who's hanging on his shoulder. I mean, that doesn't even work in the anime.
No, it doesn't. That's a good example of things when you do watch the anime and you're like, yeah, like you said, like, I don't ask questions about the TV show of the Cowboys, but I am asking questions of like, how does he carry this bleeding thing around like all the time? Like, it makes no sense. Let's focus on some of his characters. You say about like Mustafa Shakir, who plays Jet Black. Like he nails it. Like he is absolutely he is, to me, the standout character of this show. He carries the heart. He carries the sort of like he's perfectly gruff. He's the relationship with him and his daughter and his ex-wife and that sort of thing of is brilliantly well played out right up until the end. That final part of like when he sees his daughter going off with this, her stepfather and his, mother, like, is heartbreaking. Like, they've done that really well. Like, they've constantly built that up. But they've built him up. Like, he builds a relationship with his daughter, and this sort of like, family's lost, and then tear it away at the last minute. So you're just like, oh, you bastards! That's well done. When it starts, like, I felt John Cho was fine. Like, he never gets that cool. And I think a part of it is because I like John Cho. I think he's done some really good stuff. And there are bits in this when he is cool, but then there's other bits when it's sort of like it feels too much. A bit like with other things, you say about that exaggeration. A little bit like someone's nudging me in the ribs and saying, "Isn't he cool? Hey, isn't he cool? Look how cool he is. Look, he's going to do this now." It constantly felt like it was trying to tell me how cool he is.
But don't you think those moments are there in the anime?
Not as much. It feels weirdly more natural in the anime than it does in this. And maybe because the anime moves a different pace. And this is something else I think to realize is that the anime is 26 episodes or 28 maybe. This is 10. And so, like, the show can do things like you said. Like, there are episodes of the show where, like, it's just like there's barely any plot. Like, just something happens, and then it's sort of like, so you get to have those cool moments where it's just like Spike being cool. Like, there's nothing much more to it. So you get to build up that idea over time. So when it does eventually become the showdown at the end of the anime, like, it seems like more of a payoff. With this, it's sort of like it's got to keep reminding you this is who he is, because we've only got 10 episodes, so you've got to get to that point for this to work.
I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, I think that there are like you said, I mean, there's so many shots in the anime just of Spike, that are sort of like, yeah, nothing happens, But I would say is that one of the problems the anime has, and the anime gets so much better as it goes along. I mean, those first 4 episodes are like, they've got a good idea for an episode, but they have no idea how to tell a story. I mean, those narratives just collapse terribly upon themselves.
It's one of those shows that doesn't fall into place till all the characters sort of arrive.
Yeah, and it gets, I mean, even just the basic nuts and bolts of telling a story, they don't know how to do when they start. And you have like a ship appears out of nowhere, and you're like, how did they get that? What are they doing again? It doesn't matter. But you said about like the pacing. I feel like the anime, will like slow down time, and you'll have like 10 minutes in which nothing happens. And this is true especially of the early episodes. But you have like 10 minutes in which nothing happens, and it's mostly just shots and some characters bantering or whatever. And then all of a sudden, in the next 2 minutes, like, they grab a ship, the ship gets blown up, the ship crashes, and and you're like, it's like they decided, oh, now we got to bother to tell the story, and they cram it all together. I think that so even talking about like the pacing, you're right. I mean, it's a different structure. I mean, it is 26 episodes, which are half-hour episodes, so. Really, it's 13 hours versus 10, So, I mean, it's not that different, but I don't know. I mean, it is more compressed on the show, but I feel like it has a more consistent pacing. And I think that is to its better. There are episodes that I think could need more, the food stuff needs more time and needs more budget and is a weaker episode, especially compared to the anime. But that said, I do think that the show, right from that first episode, it has a certain pace that it follows. It has those cool moments, like it can take a little breather, but then it's on until pushing you forward in the narrative.
All right, let me give you. I'd say the narrative. I'm saying the narrative pace is different. I wouldn't say either is better or worse. I think they fit for what they're trying to do. I agree with those opening couple of episodes of the anime. They are very clunky, and it doesn't sort of catch its groove until probably sort of 5 or 6 in. An example, though, of one of those things that sort of irritated me, and I don't know why, and I might explain it some more. In one of the early episodes, there's a fight scene, and they're on the roof of a building, and during the fight, Spike is kicked against like the back of a placard or something that's like a promotional thing on a building, and Jet chooses to save him rather than go after the bounty. So he catches Spike, and then it sort of has this shot of him. And like there was a series of adverts for cigars when I was younger, and it was about how smooth they are. And it had this music sort of like it was a use of classical music to sort of like you say how good they were. I can't remember the name of them, but I remember the music. And then so when Spike hanging upside down against this wall, then sort of starts like smoking a cigarette, and he's like, "What are you?" And Jet's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm waiting for you to pull me up." And that just felt like one of this moment, like this almost feels like a ridiculous advert where I'm like, even in the worst situation, Marlboro will see you through. Like it just felt like that. That felt like it's one of those things where I'm pretty sure if that may even be in the anime. But for somehow I'd be like, and I can't explain this, and I'm not going to make an excuse for myself, but I could see that in the anime and go, that works in a cartoon for some reason. Like I can laugh at that in a cartoon, but for some reason, the way that the tone is set and the way the scene is set up, like it looks like a silly advert in live action, and I don't know why it is. But it's when I'm chuckling for the wrong reason. I'm like, You've missed this one's a miss, and there's a couple of scenes like that. But then there's others that work, like where it's silly. Where I'm like,
I mean, I'm glad that you isolated on that scene because that scene not only worked for me, but I would say it is a 9 or 10 out of 10.
Right.
I mean, I love that scene. I was already sold on the series. I was already enjoying the series. My complaints are sort of from a narrative standpoint of like, how Jet Black has gotten there, like in real life, you don't have the time to make these decisions. And, but that's part of the story, right? And that narrative moment. At the same time, Jet Black is getting this toy for his daughter that he's carrying through, and it keeps getting shot up, and and it's quite funny, and all that stuff works. But it climaxes on the roof of the building as he goes for Spike to save him, and the toy falls sort of like in slow motion to the ground below, and it's already been screwed up. But I'm like, I love this shot. This is a good shot. This is entertaining. And he grabs Spike, and the way that it's shot with sort of Spike's head upside down, against the brick, and like, I mean, it's like, what am I looking at? It's so bizarre. It's visually intoxicating. I'm so sold on that scene. And I think that is a cooler moment for Spike. Yes, I know what you're saying. I mean, there's the whole discussion of, presenting cigarettes as cool, and it reminds you of
that's not my advert. I think smoking like being presented as cool is fine. It was just the tone of that moment felt corny is the word I'm looking for. It felt corny. You say the stuff about Jet and the doll. That bit I was fine with. I actually enjoyed that, and I like Jet Black's frustration is like, it gets shot at, it catches on fire. So by the time he gets up the top, like it's wrecked, and he's sort of like he spent like 35 grand on this one doll for his daughter. So I was like fine with all that bit. It's just this bit felt corny at the end, and I think corny is probably where I'm coming from in some of this. It felt cheesy or too, not even campy. It's because camp is something else. This was corny. It's cheesy, but like I'm not quite gelling with this. However, there are moments when that seems to work. There's other scenes where, again, like another scene where I'm umming and ahhing is in a later episode. They're looking for some reception so that Jet can attend his daughter's recital. So he goes to a post office, and there's some funny moments in that. He obviously goes to the recital. He sort of projects himself there through a hologram, and you can see it. Not going to worry. This is where I'm like, I'm not going to worry about how this works. That how can he see this thing? See the recital, but he does, and he's waving at his daughter, and the guy in the post office thinks he's waving at him, and that sort of thing. That was all fine. But there's also this big fight going on in the background where like Spike is trying to keeps Jet out of it, but he's obviously fighting all these guys. And again, like, I'm watching and going like, this is sort of working. I'm like, I'm enjoying this bit. So, why didn't something else work for me? Do you know what I mean? So like,
what's funny is I was going to bring up that same scene as another example of like that is working on all cylinders.
Yeah.
Like I love the shot of, what you see is, you see sort of Jet Black against these windows, and that he's in this virtual world, and he's attending to this, while in the background you're watching Spike get beat up and people are being thrown around, and it's obviously like this great fight scene done to the nines, where you imagine Spike is worried about surviving, and this carnage just happened, and that's, we've seen that kind of shot a lot of times in a lot of different movies.
Yeah.
But damned if it doesn't work.
Oh, it does. It works here, yeah.
So, I mean, I know what you're saying, like the sort of hanging upside down cigarette. But, I mean, I would say that is a better example of cool of Spike Spiegel, than, probably, I'd put that in the top 5% of anything in the anime or in the live action. So both of those things worked for me. And one of them worked for you.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like, there's throughout it, there's things that seemed to work and others that just didn't, and there was that sort of. And it's for all characters. Like Jet has those moments where I'm like, when Jet Black goes and meets with his old partner, and there's that whole episode, and it's obviously that's a replay of the anime episode. Like, I'm digging most of that. Like, that feels like a good episode again. And there's some moments, but then, I'm trying to think. There's an episode where. Basically, whenever Jet has to act like a parent for Faye and Spike, again, like it feels it's not so it's forced. It just doesn't seem to always work, and it's that sort of thing of like, okay, I get it. This is a bit like a running gag. Like, he's the parent, like the grumpy parent of these two kids, but like it just seems to sort of like. I don't know. It's that thing of I don't know. The chemistry for that doesn't always work, and so it feels a little corny. Where I'm like, I'm not supposed. Are you going for a joke here? Is it supposed to be humorous? Is it supposed to be, emphasizing some drama? Like, I'm not entirely sure how you're doing this. And so there are these tonal moments. And the other thing is, you mentioned about Vicious, and I'm going to be outright. I absolutely detest Vicious in this show. Like, every time he's on screen, this show drops by points. As you said, the actor's in a completely different show. I hate whenever they introduce like fright wigs. Like, and I know he's got white hair in the anime and stuff, but it looks bad. He's like playing he's panto villain throughout. Like, it's really hammy. And that doesn't help, because every time you do go to him, and the problem is it then becomes by association, because there are scenes where I do think Spike looks cool. One of the first ones is actually when he goes back to the nightclub. I forget the actress's name, but he sees the woman who runs the club, and they have that drink and stuff. Like, and that's really well done. It's very noir. It's done really well. It's shot wonderfully. Spike looks and acts cool. And that's one of the ones where I'm like, that works. And then then all of a sudden, like, Vicious interacts with them, and you're like, oh yes, that's right. They share a linkage. And then when the show builds and you start to see the flashbacks of Vicious and Spike when he was fearless, I'm just like, none of their interactions work. None of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's the whole 9th episode is like the classic sort of like penultimate episode, flashback episode.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about that. I mean,
but that then makes me not give a monkeys about Julia or the love triangle, and that's another problem where that seems to be forming a crux. And I'm like, I don't care about this because this character's rubbish, and so like the chemistry's just not there. That I'm not buying any of that. So I just don't. There's a whole part of the show I'm just not interested in. I mean, there's an episode I do like, which is cool. Which sort of sets this love thing up, which I kind of like, is where Spike gets trapped in this sort of endless AI loop, and he's having to, and he's constantly trying to get away with Julia, and it builds up, and she keeps rejecting him. It's basically this AI is mapping his personality in his brain, or sort of stuff by doing these things. That was really cool because it shows like, okay, he is proper infatuated with this woman because he's doing it over and over and over again, like this groundhog kind of thing. And they don't play up and that was, whilst that was good, and there were some good moments in that. One of the things I thought was interesting that in a bad way, was they clearly playing up the idea this is almost like a Groundhog Day situation. Like he's playing through the same scenario over and over again, but they don't lean into, or I'd expect them to, they don't lean into the Groundhog Day tropes of like, 1, 2, 3, that happens, 3, 4, 5, 6, that happens. That sort of thing where they learn the sequence of events to get through it, like you would with
they
a
do a little
game.
bit of that. I mean,
yeah, but only they
he knows those things, but he just bypasses them instead of.
Yeah, and so like but instead of getting frustrated, like they just go straight to that frustrated and bypass them. So it's fine. It's not a bad episode. I kind of like it all, but that's when sort of like I thought I was buying into that relationship or the love triangle, and then it sort of builds up a little more. And I'm like, I don't care. Like I can't buy into this. And then you learn all the flashbacks. I'm like, I really don't care.
No, I agree with you about all of that. I think that. Yeah, I mean, really vicious is the weak link there. Episode 9, that flashback back episode, there's certain things that it shows and things that it doesn't. I mean, I think that episode, to me, more than any episode, feels like, what you were saying of like, this is a set where, there's certain shots of them together, that you don't get a feel for that relationship.
Because they've got no chemistry.
This happens, right? And a lot of that is vicious.
I agree. They're supposed to have been raised from kids together. They are supposed to be sort of like adopted brothers, and they have no chemistry whatsoever. Like I never feel like they've had like decades together to become, like this sort of odd sibling sort of partnership.
I do like the dynamic though. I mean, I like sort of like Vicious is the son of the mobster who's kind of flies off the handle, and Spike kind of as fearless, sort of keeps him under control. I think that stuff works, but the Julia stuff, like it's sort of, I don't know, maybe it's because Spike is playing it so cool, but I don't feel like that Vicious is infatuated with her, but it might not be capable of love. It's just sort of like it goes through the motions of having Spike be with her and them being in love. And you really get one short scene that establishes that, and it kind of works, but you don't really feel that they have that connection.
It's an interesting one because this is one of those ones where I'm like, the anime plays into it because they want to maintain Spike's cool, this idea of him being the cool one, but really what it should be, like you say, this is where his cool should slip. Like he's so in love with the cool edge should slip, and you get like almost an awkwardness, or show him being sort of a bit bumbling or whatever, not ridiculously so, but just enough to show that Julia has an impact on who he is, and they have none of that. Like it just feels like they're trying to do this. That whole episode, the flashbacks episode, I thought about Sin City.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think of Sin City in a monochrome kind of way, not because of the suits and everything, but just in a very that sort of like they're going for this noir thing, but it's almost like a stylistic noir, and it just felt like too much, like too corny. And the thing I'd say about Julia again, like the actress again, this thing about tone. Like Vicious is going for something. The guy who plays Vicious, he's going for something completely the wrong thing, like a completely different show. Like not sure what show he's on. Probably like Doctor Who, if I'm honest, but. His eyebrows got a check of their own, I think. But so he does all these things, but at least he's conveying. I will give him credit. When you find out that like he is the son of one of the elders of the syndicate and stuff, like his anger and frustration. Yes, it's hammy and it's ramped up, but at least I'm getting something from that. So I appreciate that, and I like the concept. However, all this twisting and turning of the love relationship, we'll get to this because we'll get to Julia. What are your thoughts on the twist at the end about like her wanting to then become the leader of the syndicate?
Can we table that for just a minute?
Okay.
Because I mean, there's a lot to say about the difference between the two in the ending. I did want to say about these relationships. I'm not sure that I buy Spike's love for Julia in the anime either.
No.
But one thing that this was a choice of the Netflix series is to you were talking about sort of Jet Black being, the father figure in some ways, or at least the mature figure.
Mm.
And that's true in the anime too.
Yeah.
But it's done quite well in the Netflix series.
Mhm.
One thing that the Netflix series clearly chose to do is to sort of age these characters a little and have them really be haunted by their past. So, and this is true in the anime, but they're not old enough to really be haunted by anything.
Yeah.
You never really buy that they're haunted in the anime. Here, it's like they're all a little older, maybe not quite middle age, but certainly, they've lived a life.
Mm.
They have baggage, and all of them have this sort of past life that they've lived. Whether it's, Spike as a mobster that he's hiding from, Jet Black, Jet Black as a cop, Faye as whatever she was before she got put in suspended animation. So there's this idea of sort of like it's almost done like reincarnation, but the idea is that all of them are haunted by something, and I think and that becomes a through line because of the narrative choice of having grounding Vicious in that first episode and having this sort of secret between Spike and Jet Black, and I think that sense of weight, of guilt, of being haunted by your past. It's implicit in the anime, but the anime never wants to dig into it. And I think that this version digs into it, and I think by and large is successful doing so.
Oh, yeah, I would say the second half of the show does that better. Like, I think you're right. And you say about sort of Fabian, what's it, in stasis, frozen, whatever. There's more to it than that, though, because obviously she was. One of the things I like about this is the fact that, and it's in the anime as well, she's unfrozen illegally. Like, she's resuscitated illegally and basically to be defrauded out of whatever she has. And in this one, there's another character that did it, and you get to meet her, this woman who claimed to be her mother, who's a con artist, but then also sort of taught Faye something. So there's even more like alluded to and stuff, and she's great. Like, that's another episode where I'm like,
yeah,
that was a really fun episode where where they're transporting this woman, and she's been chased down by this mad arms dealer, but then it turns out to be basically like a prelude to sex game.
It was all a sort of like BDSM
foreplay.
Scenario. They have a safe word. They even have a safe word. No, it's
and
quite,
people
it's
have
quite,
died
it's
along
quite
the
well
way.
done.
Yeah, that was all quite fun, and that's funny, and that's where I'm like, that was one of the only episodes I was like, oh no, the humor in that episode works. Like, it all felt like that was one of those episodes where I was like, oh, it all seems to have fallen in place. When she makes the noodles and all this other stuff, and she's sort of like charming Jet and Spike. All that felt good. Like, I'm like, I'm getting this, I'm digging into this. Faye's working really well. Like, that's the only episode I was like, that's probably my favorite episode because it just seems to work. Other than, I would say there are parts of the finale that I think work really well. But so I'm watching that, and I think this was the problem. When I'm watching that episode, I'm going, things are working here. Like, the humor seems to be firing. I'm getting this, like, the vibe from everything, and then like go, so why aren't other episodes doing the same? And I think that was the problem for overall. I'm like, I'm up and down, and then you sort of go, ugh, it's not consistent enough for me to agree that this is good.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I mean, I do think that there is some subjectivity for sort of what works. And maybe I don't know, maybe I have, a little more Aspergery like tendencies where I'm like, I see what you were going for. It has worked adequately. I am my charmed meter is enough that I'm not. I mean, I mentioned I just watched the 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles last night. I've never seen it before. There are a lot of little quips in there that are supposed to be sort of like teenage quips that just do not work, and that are just sort of like, that's cringeworthy.
Yeah.
But I tend to have, I don't know. I mean, they don't kick me out. They don't bother me the same degree that they seem to other people. I mean, it's like maybe that weird brain of mine is like, I see the gears behind this and I see what you did there, and I don't expect any of it to work the way it does for a normal human being, or to kick me out as much as it does for a normal human being. So I don't know. But I mean, definitely, I don't know. I mean, I like the Tim Burton Willy Wonka movie. And there are parts that don't work, but I see what it's doing and it doesn't all fit together as a movie. And I like that it goes for things, even if I think it's like 25% doesn't work. Yeah. So maybe I'm a little more forgiving if there's a visual panache or especially if there's a visual panache involved or something like that.
I know what you're saying, and I can agree for some things. And I think I can see what you're saying about this. Because moment to moment, like, there are moments I really like in this show. Again, going back to an early episode, when they take on that guy who's the bomber, and then they take him on his ship, and he's got that big teddy bear head on. And they can't understand him because he's all muffled because in the bear. Like, that's funny, like that. Because I can't remember if in the show, in the anime, they have the same thing, but you can understand him perfectly. So again, but they've made a choice there. Like, we're translating this to live action, so we're going to have a gag about this giant bear head. Like, and it works. And again, like, so I mean, that moment, I'm like, it's good. And then I think, like, then you get to another bit, and I'm like, this bit's not working, and it's that. And as we're talking through this, one of the things I'm thinking about, and this is a problem with Netflix, I'm thinking about other shows. I'm thinking Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or The X-Files, or Red Dwarf. We've even talked Red Dwarf. Shows where you go and watch season 1 and you go, a lot of this doesn't quite work. Like, I'm getting a vibe, which I get from sort of Bebop, and I'm going like, but this show doesn't quite work. And I'm thinking, no, but season 2 or season 3 are really good.
Yeah.
Because it found its feet. Like, it steps out of its shadow. It steps out of something and becomes its own thing. Like, it goes, okay, we've seen what doesn't work. Now we're going to massively lean into what does work. And so I'm thinking, and this is where I'm sort of going, I didn't like, it's not that I hated, I didn't fall into that bucket of going, like, I absolutely hated it. But I am now looking at it and going, this is one of those shows, isn't it? Like, if this has been done on, like, network or even on cable, and they're doing a season and gone, right, we're going to give it a second go, this could have been something great.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that adapting, and here we can get into the ending, I mean, adapting this anime, I mean, one of the things that's great about the anime, and is true about, Space Dandy, which I'm a big fan of.
And we will talk about one day.
Oh, God, please.
Yeah.
Is that they're not intended to run forever. And that's one of the things that Cowboy Bebop does really well, is that it was, 26 episodes. There's a movie set late in that series, but, it ends with Spike's dead. And he's not coming back. He's dead. They went somewhere. They took it as far as they wanted to take it. And it's not intended to run forever.
Yeah, it's a closed story. The Cowboy is a closed story. And that's a good idea.
But it's a very episodic story. I mean, I think that to make the Netflix series, they found that through line. They added the sense of gravitas or, guilt or whatever. I agree with you. The vicious stuff doesn't work. I mean, I think episode 9 is fine. I like that it's there. I like what it's doing. It just doesn't work in places. But but the problem that you're describing is like, yes, you're right. I mean, in retrospect, you could have edited this a little differently or spent the money a little differently, but seasons 2 or 3 could have that charm. But not only are you not going to get a season 2 or 3 because it's canceled, but presumably will stay that way, but also it's told the story by the end of the final episode, right?
But no, it hasn't, has it? And this is where this show differs. You're right. And also, because I want to talk about the final episode.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's get into the final episode. So the final episode, so basically we've been building. So there has been this through line. This plot has been the plot through it. Well, the through plot basically is Spike's plot. Is that he was, before he was Spike Spiegel, he was a mobster. He worked for the Syndicate as Fearless, and he was partnered with Vicious, which again, I know it's in the. Is that in the? Yeah, Vicious is in the. Is he called Fearless in the anime? I can't remember. I can't remember, but it felt to me a little bit like those names. It was like that's like a Dick Tracy villain, sort of like it's a bit too much.
Yeah, I mean, Vicious is a terrible name too. I mean,
when
his goons call him Vicious, I'm like, dude, you work for a boss, you call Vicious, okay?
Yeah.
Like, time to check out.
I mean, even a scene of two goons saying that, like, is that his real name? Like, no, his real name's Jeff, but he just likes to be called Vicious. Fair enough. But yeah, so that's the through line. Like, he has this former life. He's moved on. He wanted to run away with Julia. They were going to set up. Spike and Julia were going to run away because she was with Vicious, but Vicious found out, and Julia made a decision to sort of stay and under threat, really. But there was a setup, and Vicious thinks he kills Fearless, Spike, who actually didn't. He got away and started a new life and became a bounty hunter. So that's it. So it's coming back to sort of basically this is several years later. This is got 4 years later, and people are now figuring out that he's actually still alive, and his past is coming back to sort of bite him in the ass. And so the end of the story is this culmination of this love triangle of sort of like Julia is the prize, for want of a better phrase at this point. And so it's going to come down to Spike versus Vicious. And so in order to sort of instigate that, Vicious kidnaps Jet's daughter. And they go and have this fight in the church. And then at the end of it, it does come down to Vicious and Spike. But then Vicious is not killed. He's sort of incapacitated by Julia, who then turns on Spike as well and shoots him, and he falls through a window. So let's just talk about that element, the whole sort of. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the anime version, which is just that, Spike goes after Vicious and kills him, and they use the exact same shot earlier in the. Earlier, there's a lot of visual reference to the anime.
Yes.
The love is very apparent, but in the anime, he goes up the tower, and it's not totally clear. There are some problems with the narrative, but it's a sort of masterpiece of ending an anime properly. He kills Vicious and then sort of stumbles out and dies on the steps. I think that this obviously went a different direction. I think Julia, seeing that she doesn't really want to run. She doesn't want to run away with Spike. She has a lot more agency in this. I think the acting is fine, except for Vicious. I think she's fine. And it is really set up in past episodes that the Syndicate will have a vacuum at the top. That, with Vicious removed, he's taken it over. It is crystal clear all along that, like, the way this plot is going, anyone could step into the throne.
Yes.
And so Julia, is essentially like, well, I don't want to run away with you, Spike. What are we going to do? Hang out on the Bebop and fail to get any bounties and eat ramen all day? No, you have seen her make decisions about encouraging Vicious to be more vicious and encouraging him to make plays. She's sort of the classic woman behind the mobster sort of character at moments, who nonetheless wants to escape. And it's sort of like, I'll take the escape if I can. If not, I'm going to rule. So I think it's set up very well. I don't know that it's satisfying the main way that I don't have a problem with what happens with Julia, because in the anime, I think she's just shot on a roof as she's fleeing, and then Spike goes to confront. So I think that's kind of unsatisfying, and she's not a very well developed character in the anime.
Well, she's literally a prize in the anime.
Yes.
That's all.
And this does a lot better job,
It does.
sort of post Me Too, of giving Julia some agency. I think her narrative arc there, I probably like it better than the anime. I think my problem is that Spike survives. And it feels like that should be the closure, and having him, having Vicious killed by Julia instead of by him, I think is a nice twist. It undercuts the sort of, Batman and the Joker going at it one final time sort of, trope. But Spike surviving and then being rejected, so severely by Jet Black, I mean, I think it would have been, I know it's Spike's show, but I mean, it would have been more satisfying for me if, Spike dies.
If they'd have done this as a limited series.
Yeah. And I like the Julia thing. I mean, fine with a second season where Julia fights Jet Black or something, and Jet's like, but the Spike resolution just seems too easy.
No, I agree. Weirdly, like you say, this is the thing. All the action in the church is actually really good. Like they take Jet's daughter, they got him in the church. Like, all that's cool. Faye turning up in her little one-person thing and using like the Gatling guns through the church window. Awesome, looks brilliant, done really well. Some of the fighting's good. Even the fighting between Spike and Vicious is all right. It still feels like you say. I don't know. It's fine. But one of the things I'd say is whenever you're going to have a sword fight, it needs to feel. Then I don't know. There's something about sword fights that need to be done in a certain way for them to be successful. I think to not feel like two actors clanging shit together. I recently watched Highlander. And whilst I love that film, there's an awful lot of scenes of actors clanging shit together, and you're like, yeah, you've got no idea how to sword fight. This looks ridiculous. I don't, and I can tell. And especially considering that film opens with a wrestling match of fake fighting. So you're like, yeah, that's telling you exactly how this film's going to go. Different story. Anyway, that all looks fine. And then you say, like, Julia intervening, again, I'm happy with that. Again, I think it's a great moment as she sort of shoots Vicious and doesn't kill him. This idea of like she's you said this has it been a build up though to this moment? So she then shows a callousness in shooting Spike because she's like, you didn't come for me, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and he's like, well, I sort of couldn't because I thought I was dead, and so with the callousness with which she shoots him, I'm like, well, that comes out of nowhere for me. This idea of her manipulating things to sort of become the ruler of the syndicate, I get. Like, you've seen elements of that. You've seen flashes of it in the past, like you say, of her manipulating things or, nudging things in a certain way. Like, she's not the master manipulator. Like, she's not that. She's an opportunist. And so when you get to the end of the film, you're like, the end of the show, like, this is the opportunity. Like you say, run away or have control and power. I think I want to go control and power. So I get that. But then just to callously shoot Spike through the window feels a bit out of character, like feels out of nowhere. So I was like, that didn't work for me. Like, she should at least show some remorse. Like, I understand why, but like I can't have you. You are going to be a distraction from what I now want, so I've got to kill you, sort of thing. Like, sorry. But I don't know, that didn't work. And then they have the scene of him going through the window, and I absolutely that scene of him going down with the glass and the music choices and everything is wrong. Like, it's all awful.
I've seen a lot worse, but it's not a strength. Yeah.
No, it's not good. But for him to then be rejected, like you say, to return. You never see him hit the floor. You just see him fall, and then it cuts to this thing of Faye, like, packing up her room and all this other stuff, and it's the band getting disbanded. Like, and the next time you see Spike, he's just walking along the quay, and I'm like, hang on, like, did you fall in the water? Did you? How did you survive? Like, it feels so disjointed. It feels almost like they filmed multiple endings, and they've gone, right, let's just leave that blank, and then we will pick one when we get there. I don't know. It just, like you said, it's so unsatisfying, that bit. But then when he gets rejected by Jet because he now knows he's a mobster and stuff, like, I kind of like that moment. But the transition from this all this stuff in the church that's trying to be really stylized to that last moment is so jarring that it sort of, neither of them feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. I mean, I like this overall better than you do. I mean, I'm used to, I think we're both used to, climaxes where we hate the climax of the movie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care about any of these characters. I don't even care, like, this is only necessary because of some dumb MacGuffin plot device. And I'm just going to tune out until we get to the Dana 1, hopefully has something interesting. I like the climax here. I agree with you that basically, I want to come back to her shooting him. But basically, that fall and everything after it, get rid of. All of that is not working. That should be the end. I mean, I agree with you. Even Jet Black rejecting him feels forced to me. It's good acting. I mean, I like some of the character stuff that's going on there, but I feel like he's put up with so much,
Yeah.
and it seems like his real objection is that you lied to me about this. But he's, they lie to each other all and conceal from each other all the time. It's like Jet Black hasn't said, oh, by the way, they think that I'm a cop killer. I mean, they don't talk about that. Maybe Spike knows that, but they don't talk about that stuff. It seems like he'd be able to forgive him or at least have a more civilized conversation.
For me, I felt that moment was more about your lying has impacted and hurt my family.
Yeah.
And that was more where he was sore. Like, yeah, if it had just been them, like the Bebop crew, I think there would have been, yeah, you're a dick and I'm angry at you, but I can forgive you. But the fact his daughter got involved and was kidnapped by Vicious is like a line being crossed for Jet.
So what's fascinating to me is that you're a dad and that makes sense to you, right?
Yeah.
So you see that where I'm like, oh yeah, like that kind of occurs to me as like a little glimmer, but I'm like, it's not mentioned in the scene. So I'm just like, that plot's been resolved. That's subtext. It's not there in the text. I've had a lot of meaningless, self-deluded relationships. So I'm going to come back to my insight. Julia shooting him makes me think, they didn't have what you thought that you had, Spike. Like, the reason why it feels superficial in episode 9 is because she just wants out. It's not that she really is madly in love with Spike. She's obviously been seduced by her. He cares for her enough that he wants out. He wants out anyway, but he wants to escape with her. She just wants to escape. She was never that into you, buddy. And so to me, her shooting him, it made me think, oh, not only was that a long time ago and Spike just left her basically to be, imprisoned and scared every day of her life under this horrible guy, but he was always a means to an end. It's not that she didn't have feelings for him, but she was in a horrible situation. And so, and I grant this is not there in the text either, but I sort of can understand that move. I wish there were more underlining both of these interpretations.
Yeah. No, in fact, I see the point you're making, and I actually kind of like it. This idea that between them, because they haven't seen each other for years, and they've almost romanticized this fantasy sort of the love isn't he doesn't really love Julia. He loves this romanticized version of her that he has in his head that's built up over several years, and she doesn't really love Spike. She's romanticized him as her way out, that he will be the person that comes and saves her. And then sort of when he does turn up, there's this realization of like, I don't actually need you anymore. I think I've developed myself to a point where I'm able to sort this out myself. And so, yeah, so I can see that. Now you've explained it. That sounds like that actually makes a lot more sense. And would probably work better if I were to watch it again. But like,
a few sentences in terms of, I mean, both of us have good interpretations here. I'd love if Jet has just one sentence where it's like, dude, my kid was involved this time. You know,
Yeah.
one sentence like that would do amazing. Similarly, a couple sentences by Julia just outlining this interpret. It is amazing how well that would help this ending.
It would crystallize it that a little bit more, wouldn't it? But saying that, like those things, like that, I think it epitomizes the show for me. Like that's the thing. It's like it is swinging for the fences in many cases, but and I'd even say that it's 50-50 for hits and misses in many ways. But there's still this thing of sort of even some of the hits in some areas don't match with the hits in other areas, and so there's sort of this disjointedness about the show that I just.
What do you mean by the hits don't match? Like they're different tones, or
Yeah, exactly that. So, for example, yeah, like you say, there are moments when I'm like, this moment's working because it's really funny, like but that's not matching to the tone or something that they're trying to say. Even in the same episode of like they're trying to do this. And I'm liking that moment, and I'm like, this is what I'm saying, like this moment to moment. I'm liking that moment, that scene, that moment, whatever, and I'm liking this moment, but they're very different, and they don't quite gel together. And so, moment to moment, I'm liking things in this, but when it all puts together as a whole, it's not, it doesn't taste great. Do you know what I mean? Like if you make a cake, I'm like, oh, these taste good and these taste good, but you put them together, it tastes like crap.
I love curry and I love chocolate ice cream. Not good in the same bowl.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. And there are stories, there are movies that bother me for exactly that. And that I think do a much worse job of having weird tonal differences. I mean, we'll talk about Michael Bay at some future point. I mean, there are weird tonal differences where it's like, this is a comedy to you, but now it's dreadfully serious. I mean, but I also feel like those kinds of tonal shifts are more and more common. You weren't supposed to do those in the 1980s, and like movies from the 80s and earlier don't have those kinds of weird tonal shifts. You get into the 90s and they happen a little. You get into the 2000s and it's much more. I mean, even in stuff like The Matrix, and by the time you get to the 2010s, I'm just like, I guess this is how we're making movies now, So I'm a little more accommodating of those. I think even, Marvel movies have those.
No, I agree. Yeah,
so
I agree with that.
I'm not, I guess I've become inured to them to a certain degree that I'm not as thrown out. It's not like they have a single subject where they're laughing about like a girl dying who they're trying to rescue, and then a minute later are sacrificing themselves to save her life or something.
No, it's not that drastic. I mean, it's not Thor Ragnarok. It's not sort of like.
Well, that's the best of the Thor movies, so
Yeah, and that's not great. I can't stand Thor Ragnarok, but for that very reason, like that. I don't know. I may have just confessed something that's going to hang around me, but yeah, that's an example where they continually undercuts moments or cuts from one thing to the next, and I don't feel the tones match, and it's sort of like the stake, which means the stakes don't matter, and so on and so forth. Like, Bebop is better than that by a long shot. And even so, I'd say talking this through, I'm actually sad this doesn't get a second series, because I do think once this stepped out of the shadow of the anime, I think this show would have become its own. It would still have had the essence of what it was, of what the anime was, and if it had kept that essence in it, but could have done its own thing, and could have become something very interesting.
I think that I agree with you. I'm sure we'll return to that, but I like the point about Thor Ragnarok, and I like the comparison there because I mean I would say Thor Ragnarok is in the top 3, maybe 4 MCU movies made. Not a high bar. Having said that, it's like a piece of ice cream with sprinkles on top that adds up to absolutely nothing. And it's delightful. But I cannot remember most of the plot. I'm just like, yeah, that was entertaining. That was fun. Can't tell you really anything about it. But it's a bit of entertaining fluff and works for me on that level. but it has those sort of quips. It's just trying to be quippy and fun and a bit of mindless fluff entertainment. It probably does have moments where it pivots to seriousness. I couldn't tell you. I'm busy staring at the scenery and going like, that's a Kirby-esque line. I don't care. But this has, it's an interesting comparison because this has a lot of the same sort of like quippiness, a lot of the same sort of fun, sort of, these are down and out characters I love in both the anime and in the live action, that they can't seem to ever get a bounty. It's like, these are losers and they lose over and over again. And the way they win is like surviving. And I quite love that about Cowboy Bebop. But, the quippiness here is less important. It's subdued compared to Ragnarok. It works for you or it doesn't. But this has, in comparison, like 30%, 40% of its DNA is this sense of guilt and this, film noir sort of stuff. And the other 60% is, quips and coolness and, explodey, fun stuff, which works for you or it doesn't. Both of them do work for you or it doesn't. But, I don't know. I mean, I think that, we're not that far apart on this.
No,
I just think I can't imagine only 50% of it working for you. I mean, I'd say, 70%.
It may be something I'll come back to later and think differently. But to me, another comparison I would make to keep it in the Netflix realm is the Umbrella Academy.
I haven't seen that, but
so the Umbrella Academy is it's based on a comic by Gerard Way, and I forget the artist. Apologies. But the idea is that on one day, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of women across the world not only became pregnant but also gave birth within a sort of like hours, and the children of these women have superpowers, and this professor adopts, I think, like 7 or 8 of them, and makes them become the Umbrella Academy. It's like a satire of the X-Men kind of thing. And when they get older, like they end up using those skills for different things. Like, there's one that says, I can't remember the characters. I've seen the shows, but I can't remember. But one says like, I've heard a rumor, and in doing so, you sort of like, she will have, she's able to control you, but whatever she says, you will do. One has an ape body and is super strong and all this other stuff. And like that show has probably got I would say it's got less themes, because it has this idea of sort of like what it is to sort of have a sort of a neglectful parent and to be sort of as an outcast, and how you sort of have to adapt, and it has all those sort of themes in it, and it's got some great actors in it. But then it has this craziness, like the whole tone. There's like time travel, and all these different characters are really bizarre and really sort of it leans into the wacky, but it also has some really heartfelt moments that are really played out well. And I really enjoy that show. I think it's really, really well done. But that's a show that sort of like, it's not going for anything other than like, we know this is a bit weird, and a bit like with Bebop, like you're either on the train or you're not, and we don't care. And I'd be interested for you to see that, to watch that and go, why has that got 3 seasons and this has only had 1?
Because people are stupid.
Well, no, because that's a good show. I think there's parts you'd like that. It's got some really good elements in. Like, the first season is very much about, like, of the 7 kids or whatever, 7 be 8. There's one that always has to take this drug, and they're always told, "Oh, you don't have superpowers." And it turns out she's actually the most powerful, but they know that she wouldn't be able to control them and all this other stuff.
I haven't seen. I might love it. I might hate it. But I mean, like, look, Ghost Hunters has over 20 seasons. Okay, that makes me want to put a gun to my head this moment and perforate my brain.
Supernatural had 15. So.
Yes, my God. So look, but I mean, I think that what you said about this Netflix Cowboy Bebop swinging for the fences. fuck right, man. Like, I love that, and I would rather something swing for the fences, and to me, it's got maybe a 70% hit rate. You know, for you, it might be 50. But if I'm looking at those misses, or that I might judge a miss, not all misses are alike. Not all of them fall on their face. But, misses, some of them near misses, whatever. And I think, I see what you were going for there. I'm still kind of entertained by it. I'm not as charmed as I should be, but, kudos to you, brother, for doing this. I'm pretty happy. For me, that's a good show. I don't need everything to hit. I don't expect everything to hit.
No, and I agree. Like, I'm not expecting perfect, and I think part of it does come down to disappointment. Like, again, like you've said, you said that there's a polarizing thing of those that have enjoyed the anime in the past, come to this with baggage, and I definitely come to this with baggage. Like, I'd seen the anime first, I've seen it a few times, I enjoy it, so I definitely came with baggage, and I think that does play a factor. So I think that contributes to it. Because I am willing to let things go. Like you sort of said, one of the shows I also mentioned was Happy, which is a Netflix show as well. And I enjoyed both seasons of that. And I fully acknowledge that there's stuff in that show that doesn't work. And it's weird. And it's sort of got a hit rate that's not great. But I'm sort of coming to that with a different attitude as well. Like, I'd probably forgive that for things I wouldn't forgive this for. And I'm not always entirely sure why.
And I'm a defender of that. I mean, I watched both seasons. I enjoyed. I watched them coming out live. Like I DVR'd them and enjoyed them. And you're right. To me, that's got a lower hit rate than Cowboy Bebop, and it's got a different vibe. Like, it's more adult. It's more sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe Santa Claus is putting a grenade in his ass. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's more that kind of, wow, they went for that. Preacher had some of the same thing. The AMC series.
Preacher, I loved Preacher,
and that, I don't know what the hit rate is on that either. I mean, probably higher than Happy, but not by all that much. But curiously, the stuff that was both of those shows departed from the comic very severely, and it struck me that the stuff that I liked most in the Preacher adaptation was the stuff that was new. And the stuff that I felt didn't quite work was where they were staying faithful.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's curious to me that, I would say that, I like the anime. I didn't come into the live action having seen the whole anime. I'd seen very, very little of it. And I was actually watching them simultaneously and back and forth and whatever. But I would say that, to me, I think it's kind of objective that the Cowboy Bebop live action has a higher hit rate than Happy does.
I don't know if I can agree with that.
There are whole episodes of Happy where it's got like a couple gags that work and everything else is groan worthy. But I kind of go like, I'm glad you went for it, buddy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I enjoyed Happy more than I enjoyed Bebop. Now, there is something you make. It's a very good point about Preacher, because I love that series. I think that series was fantastic. I think all 4 seasons are really well done. I think the cast are great. And again, I think that swung for the fences. It tried for something, and it was. And the boys is another good example where they're doing something. And it's not the comic. They are doing something very different. Not very different, like, it's still in tone and all this other stuff, but it's still a different thing, and it works. I've read the comics, and I'm not so. And this comes to this idea of adaptation, especially when it comes to shows rather than, say, a film. There are TV shows. I think, again, Bebop could have looked at those and probably learnt and gone, we're going to lean a little. We're going to do something a bit more different. Like, let's not try and wrap up Spike's story in the first 10 episodes. Let's maybe pepper that in, but let's go for something different in the first 10 episodes. I don't know. I'm not going to do my thing of trying to fix it, but I'm saying, like, literally the shows we have just spoken about, Happy, Preacher, The Boys, even Umbrella Academy have distanced themselves. They've veered away from the comic content, but kept the essence and kept a certain tone and things. And because of that, they work as an adaptation. They've gone, you've got the comics and you love the comics. We're going to do something. We're not going to be slavish to them. We're going to do our thing, because we're a TV show and we're going to do a different TV show. And I think that's why it seems to have worked.
Well, I mean, I think that Cowboy Bebop was a sort of catch-22, where, you know, this is very close to the anime. I think that it improves on the anime in certain objective respects. It, you know, grounds the through line, which winds up being the climax of Vicious and you know, all of that, you know, and Julia from the beginning. I would do it a little, you know, I would do it a little differently. Obviously, you know, I don't like that the rose shots work a lot better in the anime than they do in real life. Yeah. But I mean, I think there are things that it does well. It's because of that, it is always playing a dangerous game with the sort of episodic episodes, having some kind of continuing content. That's always a difficult thing for me in you know, more episodic television that's still got the through line, the continuing plots. But, you know, think of, if this departed more. I mean, there are people mad, for God's sake, that Jet Black is a black dude. Right? I mean, there are people mad about that. I can't imagine, like he's you know, I mean, I would not be upset if he got an Emmy for this performance. I mean, you know, it's great work. He steals the show. I mean, people are mad that they're older. People are mad that, like, you know, Radical Ed it doesn't have a bigger part. You know, I mean, people are mad about everything. Can you imagine if they had departed more? I mean, I think it's a sort of catch-22 where this is like, for the audience of Cowboy Bebop, this is like Watchmen, where, you know, it's a sacred text, and any way that you depart is going to have legions of, you know, social media people angry at you. And I think that they wove a good line. I think that this is close to, you know, how I would do it. I don't know about that ending. I don't know, you know, I mean, I'd be happy with a season 2, just as, you know, but my attitude is, it's a new thing. An adaptation is a new thing. It's got to make different choices. Some are more faithful than others. I think this makes smart choices in the adaptation. I don't think all of those choices, due to the way it's shot or Vicious's performance or whatever, are successful. But I like those choices, and they, if anything, inform the original show to me rather than distract from it.
I see what you're saying. I'm like, no, I do agree to an extent. I can see, like, you know, you've said about its hit rate and this thing about adaptation. Like, you're right. It was catch-22. Like, this show is never going to win, and which makes me then ask, why bother? But then why bother with any adaptation? That's the other thing. But I do seem to think you look at this adaptations, books to film or books to television, books to live action, comics to live action work better as an adaptation style because you're not in many cases sort of clinging to specific things. Do you know what I mean? Like, say, let me try an example. So with a book, you know, you've only ever had the version of the character that exists in your head. Like, he's got certain parameters that exist, but, you know, for me, like Richard, you know, Sharp from the Bernard Cornwell books, in the books, he's sort of like, you know, he's 6', he's got jet black hair, and then you see Sean Bean playing him, and he's also he's from Essex in the books as well. And then you see Sean Bean playing him, he's like still tall, but he's got blonde hair, and he's from Sheffield, like, which is the other end of the, you know, halfway up the country. And at first, people were like, you know, well, there was no internet, so there was no internet rage in like '91. There was still that thing of people like, it doesn't work, and then you watch it and you go, no, it does. Like, it works. It's an adaptation of a book. Like, the other characters are there. Like, you get the feel for it. It becomes the same thing. And then, like I say, you can do that with comics. We've seen it with the MCU. Like, even like the original Batman or like the '66 Batman, like, you can do variances on that, and people will go, I get it. I know what that's doing, and I understand it. But for some reason, there are things like computer games and anime that when you adapt them from their original source material to a film or TV show, they come with expectations because they've seen those characters in motion. And so when those characters in motion don't appear in live action, they get it takes them out of it, because they've already seen it, they've already experienced it, they've lived it, they've seen that character in motion. Sonic's a really good example. So I'm just going to throw this out there. So the Sonic the Hedgehog film.
This sentence has never been uttered in human history. Sonic's a really good example.
That's true. More importantly, Sonic the Hedgehog the movie is a good example. That's definitely never been said. But I don't even remember the controversy around that. They released a trailer and they had given him more of an they'd anthropomorphized him. They'd made him look more realistic. He had he looked weird and it didn't work.
This is an uncanny valley problem.
Yeah. And so they said, no. The whole world said, no, we are not having that.
What is this horror show? I'm having nightmares. I saw.
Yeah, we had to live through the Michael Bay Turtles. We're not doing it again. Take it away. And they did. They took it away. And the version that came back looked cartoony. Like, he's got the gloves and the face looks cartoony. He's got the big eyes and all that other stuff. And you go, what? So I look at it and go, why is it that I'm more willing to accept that looks like a cartoon in a live action film? Oh, it's because I've seen this in motion on computer screens and as a cartoon. And so I'm now, my eyes looking at that and going, I'm seeing it in the live action film now. I recognize it and I'm happy with it. And I wonder if that plays out more. Like, we can do variations on Batman and we're quite fine with that. But you do a variation on Sonic and everyone goes, oh, no, screw to that, not happening. I don't know if there's something about that.
Here again, I return to my point that people are stupid. At the end of, I think you're right.
But listeners love you. Just so you know, listeners.
You are not stupid. The rest of humanity is abjectly stupid. For our human listeners, as opposed to Tillerin, you are the smart people. You will be kept alive and part of the chosen people after the aliens have done whatever Tillerin intends. Mm-hmm. Very good point, Scott. I'm glad you corrected. No, I mean, I think you're right that we, especially about books versus, movies. I mean, comics sort of you haven't seen them in motion, you've seen them on the page, right? But I mean, then again, you have, the counterexample, you're right, but this is a problem in that audience's mind, right? That to them, it doesn't look right. So what? It's the job of a director. It's the job of somebody creative to say, you know what? Fuck those people. I know what I'm doing. I have my vision. And, have I thought about the way Sonic looks? Yes. We have thought about that. We've made a decision. The studio can do what they want and then change it. And it's for the better or not. And you argue it. But the point is, as a creative person, you've decided on an interpretation and hopefully decided on a visual interpretation that fits with your overall interpretation of the story. We have, we remake movies, and they're not all horrible. Scarface is a remake, for God's sake. There's nothing wrong with remaking a story or reinterpreting something. And I think that what matters to me is it a strong take? Is it consistent? So you say, like if Sonic is dealing with real world problems, maybe we want him to, that's a choice. Does this fit together as a set of choices that were made in this reinterpretation? And then 2, does it work? And for me, Cowboy Bebop, I can see the choices that it made. I understand where it chose to depart. I understand why it did. I feel like it's a consistent set of choices that makes sense, that is faithful to the original in a lot of respects. And where it departs, I understand why they made those choices. And those departures make sense together as a package to create this new thing. And for me, it works. It works on a higher level than it does for you. And if people are upset about it, F them. I love plenty of movies, comics, video games. I am well aware that if I ever get an adaptation of those are going to be an adaptation that I like or I don't. But I don't get to I mean, I can complain if I want, but I still have my original. I get what you're saying. It's a new take. Every staging of a play, for God's sake, everybody knows that when you stage a Shakespeare play, it's a version of Shakespeare. If you change the language, nobody says, "Oh my God, you changed the language." Wait a minute, now somebody's black, and so no, it's Shakespeare. Of course, you're going to reinterpret it. That's what we want. Wait a minute, you set Othello in the present day. Who cares? Have a good interpretation.
It's okay. I'm
ranting.
No. And I see what you're saying, and I'm trying to sort of think of a counter to this. And I think there is a point. You mentioned about films being remade. You mentioned Scarface. Let's be clear. By the time Scarface came out with Al Pacino, no one who was watching that had seen the 1930s version. Right? It's like The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. The people that watched that, very few of them had seen the 50s version. So you get those things where you go about reinterpretation, and you're right, and it is weird. And I also agree that sort of with people, like for some reason we have these arbitrary things, and I'm just as bad. And in fact, I'm doing it with this, where you go, I'm willing to accept an interpretation of that, but not this. And I think weirdly there are certain, right? I'm going to make a Doctor Who reference. A lot of things are, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. You can make changes, but there are key points in pop culture that I think people cling to. They are unmovable. And weirdly, I think Bebop is one of them for a certain group of people. Because it might have been their introductory point to anime. They came across it at a certain point in their life. It's been, it's sort of taste forming or whatever. This is the whole thing with Watchmen. You said the same. You're right. Watchmen. Certain people have come to that, whether you think it's a masterpiece or not, came to that. So any interpretation, whether it be the Zack Snyder film or the TV show or whatever, they come to that with like, well, it better not do this, sort of thing. However, we're also more willing to then accept an interpretation or a department from something else, like Preacher, where we'll go, yeah, I've got the original and I'm fine with that, but I'm going to watch this because it's fun. I enjoy this version. And that's the thing, I enjoy this version. Batman, Superman, like we've got versions of those characters, like each one of them, as long as there's an essence. But there are certain things that seem to be not so much sacred cows, but are immovable points in history, where they go, that you cannot. The live action Akira is another good example, where like I am very firmly of this thing of like when they were like, oh, we're going to set it in America and Keanu Reeves was going to be in it, and you're like, what? Hey, like up until he was in his 40s, and you're like, no, like this is about kids. Like there are certain things in this, like I would rather not see a version of this. I would rather see, I have the anime and I have the manga, and the manga is different to the anime. Right. And I'm happy if the film's going to be different, but at least try and keep those core concepts. Well, and I think there's elements like that like, this, I don't know.
I'm suspicious of this. Because the version of this argument that I'm used to hearing is like about what's in the DNA, right? Like as opposed to the fixed point in time, right? Like, what's the DNA of this character? But then you get things where it's like, look, James Bond is a white guy. That's part of the DNA. Really? Why?
No, yeah, but
people can make these arguments that certain things are intrinsic. Go ahead.
No, but okay, I would say that James Bond is a strawman argument because we are now working towards. Like we've seen, we are. He's another character where we are willing to say, oh, there's a version of that. Oh, I prefer the Daniel Craig version to the Roger Moore version. Sherlock Holmes. Oh, have you seen the Benedict Cumberbatch version? Much better than the Basil Rathbone version. Like we get to this idea of versioning of characters. However, you say we're going to get a new version of Indiana Jones. Someone's going to hit the fucking roof. Why is that different? Why is that different?
It's not. It's because people are stupid.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm agreeing. But what I'm saying is some things, for some reason in pop culture, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that this is the facts. that for some reason some things get fixed in pop culture
Well,
and others don't.
The thing is, if if you the first time, like, look, if you cast a woman as James Bond, or a guy from India as James Bond, you were going to catch hell online. And you can say that seems fine, but it seems fine to you and me. It doesn't seem fine to a lot of people online who are going to be angry and pissed off. So, if you recast Indiana Jones, it's going to seem fine to a 12-year-old kid who didn't grow up and say, like, look, if it doesn't look like those posters, it's not Indiana Jones. I mean, look, Indiana Jones has been recast. It was called the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. We've seen young Indiana Jones in the movies too. I mean, it's not. Yes, I know. It seems like like a bigger thing, but that's because it hasn't been done yet. Once it's done, there's got to be the first guy who is the non-Sean Connery, right? And you do that enough, and then look at Batman. 8 million, people will say, like, oh, well, I remember people saying, well, if it's a fun Batman, that's not Batman. Batman's dark. Well, now that's become a little more available to say and get away with. But, I mean, these things can be reinterpreted. The question shouldn't be, is that okay? The question should be, is it good? Is there a vision there?
Yeah, all right. You are right. But here's the thing: people aren't objective; people are subjective, and this is the thing. People carry baggage, and I am going to do my thing. I'm sorry, I was trying not to do this thing, but one of the things I'm in my head. You said about the key points, the DNA. The first season, let's take Preacher as a good example. The first season of Preacher is not in the books. Like, it's almost like a prequel to the books. Like, it has little bits of it, but it's very much, the first season is very much set up for the rest of the show. And people at first were like, oh, no. And then they watched it and were like, oh, okay, I sort of see what you're doing. Like, but you're not really touching anything that we care about. So I'm not so concerned about this. So they sort of bought into the characters before they took them through the books. Do you know what I mean? And so I think one of the things that this has done has taken, as you said, people have this is a bit of a sacred cow for some reason, and there are certain iconography that they sort of see. You said about the picture of, like, the images of Spike as cool and that thing in the church at the end. I think the mistake this made was addressing that in the first season. I think this should have been a 10 episode. They could have kept some of it in, as I said, peppered it with that stuff, but had 10 episodes of fun, but dark. Do the things, do your LeFous and do your other bits and pieces you want to do, but keep it a bit wacky and have like a climax, figure out a climax to have, but have 10 episodes of, like, we're introducing this world, we're introducing these characters. Bring in an Ed, Radical Ed at the end, whatever you want to do in that final episode. Try it. But don't try and address the heavy, weighty stuff until you've got people loving the new versions of the characters. I think that's the problem. I think that's me in my head now, dawning on me, is this tried to sell a reinterpretation of the story and a reinterpretation of the characters, and you can't do both.
Oh, well, you can do both. I mean, every single adaptation we've ever seen does both.
No, because it doesn't always do explicit material, does it? This carried too much.
Like, I mean, every Batman movie we've ever seen adapts the Batman murders of his parents, and it changes the character, and it changes different. Exactly how those murders are done.
I honestly feel this is different.
Why? Because it hasn't been adapted before. It has.
Yes, because you've said it hasn't. There hasn't been a precedent set, and so they rushed it. And I think, again, talking about The Boys or talking about Preacher, this idea of leading people into it, because they have this baggage, leading people into it would have made this much more of a success.
I mean,
save the church thing for the end of season 2.
You have a very good idea here, and I want to get back to that. But I want to, first of all, just say this is so close to the original. This is 95% of the original. I mean, it is 90%, 95%. Without a doubt, it's in that kind of range. I mean, that's like Zack Snyder's Watchmen is 90%. I mean,
yeah, you know how I feel
know,
about that.
I know, but okay, so you can argue it gets the tone wrong. You can argue about changing the squid at the ending, whatever you want. But my point is, like, you don't get to complain if an adaptation of something you love is 90% or higher.
It's not.
You know what I'm
think it
saying?
is. But I don't think it is. But I don't think
course
it
it
is
is.
90%. No, it comes. There are certain things in this. I am trying to think of, examples. But there are certain things, like you say, a pure adaptation isn't always what people want, and that's the thing. It's about interpretation as well.
Yeah.
But my point is, it has its adaptation. You're saying, all right, yeah, well, there are scenes and there are beats in here that are 95% of the anime, great, but
Shot
they
for
don't
shot.
work.
The essence of the characters are
Yeah,
90% too.
but
It's not like Robert De Niro plays, the main character.
But I'm not complaining about the characters. If anything, I think the top three are great. I agree that I did actually at one point complain. I thought John Cho looks a little old for it, but I get over that. The reinvention of Faye Valentine works for me. I think she's actually really good. The top three, the main three are great. It's not that. To me, it's the way they've crammed in the plot and done things feels too much. It's almost like I don't know what I'm sure it's hard to explain it.
Almost like you're doing a TV miniseries.
Yeah,
it's
but
almost like they turned it into a TV miniseries.
But then there's too much. They should have stripped other elements out then.
Well, but I mean, you've pretty much got to have a through line. I mean, part of the problem. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was in. I don't. This thing about Spike being this main thing, and this whole thing with Vicious and that sort of thing. Like, I get it. It just feels like it's almost like the uncanny valley of TV. Like the whole show. It's like I'm seeing it and I'm seeing this version of it, but it's just off center for me. Where I'm like, I can't get on board with this.
Okay, so I mean, this is different. This is the argument that, like, if you're going to do an adaptation and it's going to be close, like if you can't be in that 90% range, right?
Yes.
You've got to be 98 and try to do a shot for shot remake of Psycho, or you just go like, all right, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that, Vicious is an alien with blue skin and, just kind of go in your own direction. And I'm fine. I'm fine with either. I'm okay with this, and I don't understand. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying about that kind of uncanny valley of adaptation. But I think we've seen it before and not had that reaction.
Yeah, there's just a clunkiness to this. As I said, it's not just that. Like I said, okay, let me just if it was just that uncanny valleyness of it, yet I was taken in by the cool, or I was taken in by the humor, or I was like you say, moment to moment, it was still working for me.
Yes,
I'd be on board because I'd be watching Preacher. If or if, like you say, it was miles off, but again,
I think this works as well as Preacher does. But okay,
this way it doesn't work as well as for me as Preacher does. I was more into Preacher, and I still think that was because you were given a run up to appreciate the characters before you had to take on too much. But with this, I think because it's that for me, it's that thing of being uncanny valley. It's trying to be something, but then not. But then also, I also found episode. All right.
What is it trying to be that it's not?
It's trying to be, like you say, an adaptation, like 95%, but then every now and then it'll sort of pull back, which is sort of fine. But for some reason, I'm trying to explain it. Moment to moment, as I said, like I'm enjoying one moment, but I'm not enjoying the next. I enjoy one character, but then they're not the next. And so I think this is almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like it's not one big thing. I can't tell you like there's one big thing I dislike about this show. I could have gone the other way, but like watching Vicious and all that stuff with Julia, like I can't be doing with that. Like it just doesn't work. Like you say, he's in a completely different show, and it just feels, it just doesn't work for me. There are then sort of bits of humor that I'm like, where I'm saying, weirdly, like that fight scene where I've said like Jet Black is at the recital, but there's the fight scene, that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
But then the point of with Spike being hung off the building, and lighting the cigarette, that felt like too forced cool. That was like someone nudging me and telling me how cool this was. Like, there are other moments I can't, the LeFou in this is a good example of sort of like, it sort of works and then it goes, like, it's like with the clown thing, it's like, no, stick with the clown throughout, because that sort of would have been crazy. Stick with that. I don't need the explanation of that. Those sorts of moments.
I think that's a weak episode.
Yeah.
And it has
then,
problems of adaptation. I do think that's a good example of,
yeah, and then the
commit
flashback
to something, right?
exactly,
And commit to what's going to work best, even if it's a deviation.
Yeah, but the last sort of 10 minutes of that episode are really strong. Like, I like there's moments when they're having to do the plan in rhyme so they remember it better. Like, that's funny. Like, that works for me. And then the final sort of fight where he gets Spike gets his ass handed to him and they do all that sort of stuff. Like, again, that sort of is all working for me. But the first half of that episode, like, I really kind of struggled with for some reason. And then the flashback episode, like, just was a slog. And so that thing that
I think this really just comes down to what works. I mean, for me, the whole like thing in rhyme works less for me than it does for you. Like, I think it works, it's fine. But it's kind of like, I see what you're doing, it's clever rather than funny, for me. But I think, ultimately, this is just like, comes down to like what works for each of us.
Yeah. It's all subjective, yes.
But, I want to get to this point. I mean, for me, the episode 9, the flashback one is like, yeah, I see these faults, but, I don't know. I've seen, it seems to me we've reviewed probably half of the movies we've reviewed have some actor who clearly is in the wrong movie, and we haven't said like, I can't stand it, like, I mean, it doesn't work for me. Yeah, I mean, it's just there's that guy, and he's every time he's in the scene, I sort of think, yeah, he pulls the movie down or whatever. I mean, I like what you're saying about I'd like to see a season 2. I like what you're saying about kind of the idea of just sort of lead up to it. I also like the idea of just having had a different ending to this and killed off Spike and just said, look, if we get a season 2, fine, but we're not going to do this thing of kind of ending on a cliffhanger, Marvel style, we're going to make this and not assume we're going to get renewed, which I always think is the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
So I would have preferred that. But I do also understand this idea of, lead into it. At least it's an interpretation. I think a season 2 is going to be, if they ever did it, it would be a different direction. It'd be interesting. And again, it doesn't take anything away from the original. The one thing that I'll say is, if they did a season 1 with this cast, even if they replaced Vicious with, a Shakespearean actor that you and I both love, the end of season 1, the same people who protested this online would say, not only is this not Cowboy Bebop, but you've thrown away the entire plot of Cowboy Bebop. What is the point of a kind of prequel nonsense? This isn't my Cowboy Bebop. They'd be just as mad. And then in retrospect, if that were also canceled at the end of one season, you and I would be saying, what was the point of this? Why did you start with the prequel and kind of never get there?
Well, yeah, it didn't. It's that thing. You make a really good point, actually. The one point I would say is, and again, it's not that ending. Like, I have problems with that ending. Like, the choice of the music with the fall and all the slow mo, that sort of doesn't work for me.
I agree.
I don't mind the build up though, like the love triangle parts. Like I said, whilst I'm not buying into it, I don't mind it being the story, because it makes sense. Like, there are elements of it I actually do like, and whenever it goes to the club and all that stuff is pretty good. As I say, like, I don't think you and I are that far apart on this. Like, I'm not trashing it. I'm not saying this is awful, and I'm definitely not in that thing of going, this is not Bebop. It's like I say, it's an interpretation, it's a version, but I'm trying to say, like, why for me it sort of like didn't work, and it is subjective. But it's that thing of, like you say, either commit to doing, like you say, a limited series and do the story and move on, and then go, now we're going to do another anime, and you're a bit like, do you, what's his face? Do you sort of like, we're going to do The Haunting of Hill House, I'm going to do The Haunting of Bly Manor, like we're going to do Cowboy Bebop, and then I'm going to do something else, and then I'm going to do that if you want, an anthology series of short form anime. I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd be into that,
Yeah.
But then, like you say, either that or think of a way that actually you can close off the season, but you leave it open ended.
Right.
And you don't sort of like, if anything, blow your load all over the screen in the first 10 episodes.
I mean, this would be very look. I mean, I agree with you. We're actually very close. I mean, we're arguing at times, but we're actually like we're very close to each other on this. I mean, I think this would be near perfect if you recast Vicious.
Mm-hmm.
If you had maybe one or two more episodes and a little more money to do like LeFou right, and I mean, I do think that was mostly a budgetary thing.
Yeah, I agree.
If you just had a little more money to do that, maybe do a couple more episodes to insert more of the episodic stuff that worked of the original, tone down, the running plot a little bit. This would be, and do the ending planning that it's going to be your ending. Whatever it is that you think is right there, whether they go their separate ways or it's, you kill off the main character. I would say that's about a perfect show. It's about as good as you'd ever going to get in a Cowboy Bebop live action adaptation. And I would say this is pretty close to that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, no, again, like I say, it's not. You make a good point. One of the things, actually, because I'll say we'll wrap up in a second, but one of the things you've said there, which is actually really interesting, is if you added in a couple of extra episodes, 3 more episodes. One of the things that we complained about, or you hear people complain about, and sort of like the Marvel Netflix shows with all these filler episodes. Oh, they do filler episodes. This would benefit from filler episodes, and it makes me think. From when you said that, it makes me think of like the X-Files. In that sense of like, yes, it had its overarching story. Nobody goes back to the X-Files to watch the overarching story because it's crap. Sorry. You go back to the X-Files to watch the Monster of the Week episodes. When anyone lists the top 10 episodes, it's the Monster of the Week episodes, and there's some fantastic ones. This needed a Bounty of the Week, a couple more Bounty of the Week episodes to get you on board with the cast. And I honestly think you are right. I think that would have strengthened this show an awful lot.
Well, and it would cost more money, but I mean, it involves a bigger commitment, and this, I think, kudos to Netflix for doing this. I mean, I think this is a big commitment already. But imagine if a couple of those episodes you could have Radical Ed instead of shoehorn. I mean, I get why there's not room. You've already got an ensemble cast of 3 people. Faye's done very well. I think better than the anime. People are cosplaying Faye. You notice they cosplay Faye from the live action. They're not going to cosplay Faye from the anime for any number of reasons. Because
you'd be incredibly cold.
True. and also, it's bad enough being at a convention as a woman dressed in a skimpy clad, skimpy outfit. Try that one. Or don't. But yeah, I mean, you could have then Radical Ed bring her in for an episode or 2, and then have her. That episode that introduces Radical Ed is a great episode of the anime. You could adapt that and then have I'm hanging around with you, but you can, So I agree with you, and I think that would be more satisfying.
Yes, I think you're right. It's not far off. It's but because will you return to this?
Yeah. I mean, I hope that there's a second season. I don't know when I'd go back and watch this, but I would not be surprised if I do. It might be an episode here or there. You would not. Would you go back if there were a second season? Would you watch season 2?
I would give it another go. Definitely.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And that's because, as I say, I've seen shows that have stumbled in their first season to then go on to be really, really good.
Well,
so
I wanted to make just a couple points before we go. One is about how the original is so trans friendly. And it has Radical Ed, who's Ed, but is a girl. And nobody's concerned about that. That's not an issue. And then you have a two-parter in the middle where Spike has a friend who, was like in the war with him, and he's like been exposed to this substance, that he has breasts and is this femme fatale in this area that has no women. And as problematic as that might be with not having wanted this, it's not a thing. Nobody makes it's like, all right, little mama's boy, or nobody goes to those places. And those characters all get cut from this version. What they substitute instead is Faye being a lesbian, and not only not being into the guys, not being a love interest, unlike the main plot, but just I love the fact that they did that. I think this version of Faye is better for it. The stuff with the mom works very well, and that while I like that trans history in the original show, I like that they are doing other stuff that is progressive and working.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think I definitely agree with Faye being an interesting character in the sort of the way they treat her in this. Give her a bit more, like you say, not that much agency, because she's got agency in the anime, but like, yeah, she's definitely more well-rounded, I'd say, in this this version. And I think, like, yes, she becomes. I like, one of the bits I do like is there's an episode when they're trying to be tracking down specific bounties, and it becomes a sort of like the connection episode between Spike and Faye. It's almost like that bit in Jaws when they're comparing scars and they start comparing bounties and stuff. And like, again, like moments like that are good, and it works. And then but then there's also the fact that like we have people being turned into trees, and that episode's a bit is to me was a bit clunky and a bit sort of like, and that, again, it's that sort of thing of going moment to moment where I'm like, I'm liking what they're doing with this, but that is grating on me. But yeah, I agree. I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think like I do, I don't, as I said, I don't dislike this enough to not want more. Like, if they did a season 2, I would most definitely watch it, and I think there's potential there to do something and be really, really fun. But I don't think we'll get any more.
Well, just let's see how far apart we are. If you had to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10,
think about what we did for the season wrap up. I haven't got my things anymore, have I? I've ripped them up. My paper with my numbers on. I have to remember them. So 5 was like meh, 6 was average, 7's good, 8 was very good, 9 was excellent, 10 was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as like 5 is meh, 6 is fine, 7 is good, 8 is great.
I'd give it a 6.
And I'd give it a 7.
Yeah.
So we're not that close. Like, we're not that far. Like, you think it's fine. It's not legit good.
Yeah.
Definitely not great. And I think it's good. It's definitely not great. It's got issues, but it's better than, it's just fine.
This is one of those shows where I say, I see that, again, like you said, I see what they're doing, I see the quibbles, but I think, like, you give this the chance to breathe, I'd be giving this a 7.5.
Yeah. No, there's a version of this that would be like a 7.5 and 8, that, like, give it a little more room, edit it better, I mean, I think a lot of these episodes, a little bit of editing could just tone down the sort of like vicious stuff. I mean, even like the tree stuff, what mostly doesn't work is the special effects aren't quite there. I mean, another round of edits and maybe, enough money to do like one more episode worth of stuff. Would amazing the difference that could make. Yeah.
I hope that they don't see this. They say it's been cancelled. Let's see what happens. Netflix is incredibly ruthless at the moment because they've got to maintain, new content is how they thrive. So They need the successful stuff.
Well, all I know is that this Netflix series ruined my childhood. I'm so angry at new content based on the stuff that I like. I don't understand this. I'm in a weird universe, right? I don't get this.
Considering, like I say, I literally came back from sort of seeing Spider-Man: No Way Home last night, which is all about the nostalgia trip. Like this it's a bizarre balancing act between fan service and satisfying that nostalgia and wrecking people's childhood.
But nothing is wrecking your childhood, man. Like if there's a Ghostbusters in which you love Ghostbusters, I love Transformers. There's a Ghostbusters in which the Ghostbusters are in a battle royale, brutally murdering each other. I mean, you would probably not like that. Probably think it veers away from the DNA of Ghostbusters way too much. Having said that, it doesn't ruin your childhood. It's not destroying those memories of the Ghostbusters.
No. I agree. I've never felt like that. Like and I agree with the sentiment. Like, I've never watched something and gone, yeah, this is retrospectively ruined the thing I liked before. Like I don't understand that. Like this thing when people go, well, this just goes, but this makes the previous film worse. I'm like, how? Like I don't understand that sentiment. I agree. Anyway, we shall wrap up there. This has been a bonus episode for you.
Fascinating. We've gone at it, but I think it's an interrogation of these issues of adaptation and what works for somebody and what doesn't, and how we can kind of like come at things and be very close, but still sort of like fall on one side or the other very passionately, but at the end of the day still have seen the same thing.
Yeah. On the next episode, we'll be doing He-Man Revelations.
I quite like that, and
which was another one I think you and I sort of felt.
Yeah.
Again, we've run out of time and we will talk about off air. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go through the full spiel because we've gone on, and this is a Christmas bonus episode. So what I will say is, thank you very, very much for listening. And the season 3 is continuing. We've got our bonus stuff coming up soon. So enjoy Christmas, stay safe, have a very Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you in 2022.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.